Hi, it's Pat here again. Firstly, you may notice that I've changed my location. Same house, I've just moved from the spare bedroom into the dining room. Today I want to talk to you about the interpretation of evidence or the interpretation of facts which are used as evidence. Often what we see is that facts that are used as evidence to support evolution are often the same facts that are used to support intelligent design or creation. An example of that would be the Italian wall lizard. For those of you who are not familiar with this example, I think it was in the 70s, 1971 or something like that, biologists isolated a population of Italian wall lizards on an island, which forced them to adapt to a different environment. There was more plant life, plant food there, but it was coarser and tougher to digest, and subsequently what they found over the years was that this population of wall lizards developed larger and stronger bites, jaw lines, and increased bite strength rather. But what was even more interesting is that it appeared that in their digestive tract they seemed to develop a new function or a new organ that was not there before, and that was what they call the cecal valve. And the cecal valve was designed, well, apparently designed to restrict or slow down the process of digestion, and which would then allow for fermentation to take place, and the fermentation would increase or aid digestion. So that was the feeling among evolutionists, that this was something that evolved rapidly through natural selection or through evolutionary processes. On the other hand, intelligent design proponents see it as something entirely different. First off, this feature of cecal valves this was not the first time it had been observed. It had been observed in other lizards previously to this population. So it was not a new feature among the lizard population in general. Second of all, intelligent design proponents see it as an example of a latent feature which is already present in the genome. Now, I have an analogy in mind about that. I want to show you what that analogy is. That's this here. This is what we call a thermostat. A thermostat can be found in the engine of most motor vehicles, the cooling system. And what the thermostat does, I'll just show you again, is it has a spring-loaded mechanism in it, and what happens is, when your car is in a cold climate, overnight the engine becomes very cold, the engine block becomes very cold, and the water becomes very cold. And when you start it up in the morning, that's not good for the engine, because the engine needs to be warm. The colder it is, the more friction it creates, and quicker it wears out. So the idea is that this thermostat will restrict the flow of water from the radiator that's pumped around your engine, will restrict the flow of water. And what happens is, as the pistons move up and down, they generate heat very quickly. And the idea of the cooling system is to keep the heat to a safe level, so that no damage can take place. But when the car is very cold, it is a dangerous time for the engine, because the engine can cool down. The engine is trying to run at optimum revolutions, while the engine is cold, and that's no good for it. So the thermostat restricts the water flow, and the less water that is pumped around the system, the quicker the engine heats up. Now what happens is, as the engine does heat up, this element inside expands with the heat and opens the aperture inside the thermostat, allowing more water to pass through. It's pretty ingenious design, really, when you think about it. So that once the engine is warm, then it needs more water and it gets more water. Now, I come from a place called South Australia, a state called South Australia. I lived in a place called Mount Gambier, which is very cold, icy in the winter time, hot in the summertime, but icy in the winter time. So the thermostat in my vehicle was used quite frequently, obviously, particularly in the winter time. But for the past 9 or 10 years, I've lived here on the Gold Coast, or in Brisbane area, and this is a much more tropical climate. When I first moved up here, there was no, I looked through about 30 houses or so, and there was no sign of heating systems, wood fires or anything like that, because it just doesn't get cold here. Nothing compared to what it is down there. And so the car that I brought up here, although it had a thermostat, the thermostat became a latent feature here in Brisbane, because it simply did not function. It did not come into function. It wasn't needed, it wasn't called for, and therefore it didn't function. So that spring was always expanded to allow maximum airflow, maximum water flow. It never contracted. It never came into action since I've been here, because it just doesn't need to. And that's a good illustration of a latent feature, and it makes sense that a designer who designed a creature would design it to be able to adapt to different situations. So these kind of adaptations are definitely observable, have been observed, but they are not, in my opinion, an example of evolutionary change. They are an example of adaptation within a species. Anyway, that's my thought for today. I hope you enjoyed that, and you're welcome to respond.